So for this case, it took me some time to work up. I'm going to walk you through the steps. I've actually already performed the surgery, so I can kind of give you feedback on how it worked out for me. What I initially did was just place my 4 implants between the inner foramen and 1 implant in the posterior. He wants fixed, and I wanted to broaden out the AP spread, and he really has no bone in this back area here. It's like this measures 6 millimeters to the inferior alveolar nerve. So I placed the first 4 implants level with this bone loss here, trying to get to level out the horizontal plane of occlusion. He is going to go to a hybrid type prosthesis, and then all I did was just I measured the incisal edge position of the teeth in this area to the occlusal plane of this implant. Assuming that these teeth are 1 millimeter out of occlusion, I have 18.45 millimeters roughly, so plenty enough room for a hybrid type fixed retainer. Then it was time to bring in the denture. So I digitally scanned the denture, and I meshed them on top of each other. The mesh didn't come out as well as I wanted to, but it did offer me a couple different things that I'll mention here. One is it really showed me how much bone loss I had in this lower right quadrant, and kind of verified the need for me to not place an implant in there or distal angle this implant for any reason. I didn't see a justification for it, and I matched them up with the occlusal plane of this tooth all the way to this tooth, made sure everything that fit pretty well, and then I also verified that all the implants were coming out from the lingual aspect or the occlusal aspect in the case here. At that point, I essentially did, I removed the denture and I segmented out the mandible. I went into bone segmentation here, and I basically just did advanced jaw segmentation, outlined the mandible and outlined the teeth and mandible all in one, and I got this surface here. So before doing anything else, I duplicated the original file just to make sure I wouldn't mess anything up, and so I had this bone model cut, and on top of the bone model cut, I made a surgical guide that you can see here, and I'll increase the translucency so you can see I essentially just did an overlay on the mandible. Alright, so now I have an instead of a DICOM file here, I have an STL that's actually printable, and I made a bone reduction guide on top of that. And I'm starting to do this routinely where I duplicate everything. So I took the bone cut and I took the surgical guide and I just duplicated them. So all I did was just highlighted this in surfaces. Let's go back to surfaces. Highlighted this and press this duplicate button, and I got essentially another bone pre-cut model here, and then I also got another bone surgical guide, because then I'm gonna cut these, right? So once I duplicated them, I was ready to make cuts. To do that, what I did was I exported both of these together. I just went File, Export Data, and I exported them both out together, and then I re-imported them back. I did File, Import, STL Models. I imported them back into the software, and I didn't stitch or anything. I just pressed cancel and stitch, and it automatically came in together, something like this. And then I was ready to use my cut tool to remove the bone and remove this surgical guide to make my bone reduction guide. Here's my thought process. So this is pretty simple. All you have to do is, what I'll usually do is make one of these translucent, like you saw earlier. Have my implants on, the guide tubes. When you blow this up, you can zoom in and kind of figure out how much bone you need to remove. So we'll go back into surfaces, click on bone reduction, make this a little translucent so you can see your implants. And then all you do is make sure you're on the bone model, press cut, and then just outline the area between the implant and this abutment and the cut tool. And I removed all this, and then I moved this over, and I used the cut tool again, and I removed all of this, and I removed tooth number 19 and I kept tooth number 18. So this is why, and I'll zoom out of that. So once you cut that, then you'll get this. Okay. I knew I was going to have a good solid landmark right here, but I was not going to have a predictable landmark on this side for the bone reduction guide. So my thought process was, I'll make a bone reduction guide that extends distally in this edentulous area that's predictable, and this tooth's predictable. So I'll have a hard stop here, and I'll have a hard stop here, so my guide will seat, and then it'll seat on the buccal and the lingual, and I can remove all of this bone before I place my pilot guide. So then, after the bone was made, I was then able to make a pilot drill guide, which is very simple to make, and I also kept this tooth as well for a hard stop. Now I'll tell you this, after doing this for the first time using a natural tooth, this tooth was really bad periodontally involved, and it worked pretty well for the bone reduction, but after that it didn't work that well. It was pretty mobile, so I basically just cut this off, and this had enough surface area on the occlusal portion of this bone to seat really hard on the bone without any movement. So I really didn't even need this tooth. So it was beneficial for the bone reduction guide. It was not beneficial for the pilot drill guide at all. I don't think you really need it next time. And then what I did was, I'm going to get off of this pilot drill guide and bone reduction guide. So then I took the denture originally that I had up here, and I duplicated it, and then because of the bone reduction, I basically I duplicated it, and then I just slid it down so I could see all the point of access holes of where my implants were coming out. And then I basically just made a surgical guide on top of this denture, which you see here, and I 3D printed this as well. So basically what this was giving me now was a surgical guide to put on top of my denture, so I could drill holes through this, so I could first start out the conversion process for this lower, if that makes any sense. But essentially, long story short, whenever you go to the mouth with a conventional denture and you want to do a conversion process, it's really hard to get your orientation and find the multi-unit abutments. It's difficult. So the idea is, if you can have a guide that sits on top of this, drill out holes where your implants are planned, and then when you take it out, and actually what I'll do is I'll show you some images. So essentially this is what it is. I had the denture, I put this guide that I printed out for the denture guide, I sat it on top of the denture, and I drilled my holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 right here. And then essentially I came up with this. And so now when I go to the mouth for the conversion, I can see the multi-unit abutments through here, widen out a little bit so I can get those titanium cylinders to slip through. I'll show you what those images look like. I don't have a better photo of it, but essentially this is the intaglio surface of it. I just widened out the osteotomies around these areas, and then did a hard pickup on all of these to get this lower denture to seat passively without boring out a bunch of material. And you can see same places that I planned, and then I actually I cut off the cantilever on that area, so I wouldn't have a large cantilever. And that's pretty much the design and the thought process behind this, and utilizing the scanned denture that we originally had. Also incorporating that into the surgical guides, duplicating the surgical guides, making a bone reduction guide, then making a pilot drill guide for this patient. That's it. If you have any questions, please post, and email me if you have any questions, and I can post some other cases that I'm working on.